Welcome to Dawn of the New Earth. My name is Morgue, and I'm an ex-Christian revealing hidden knowledge to create a new Earth. And today we are looking at the darkest chapter in one of the most disturbing creation stories ever written that was banned by the church. So we started reading this last week or the week before, I think 2 weeks ago we started this. And this is a book called The Paraphrase of Shem. And it describes a very graphic and disturbing creation story. And it just gets weirder. It's about to get strange. I'm going to be honest with you. This is going to be a weird one. Last week, we saw how darkness, which is essentially the representation of Satan, ejaculated into the womb of nature, and it's just going to get weirder from there. We're gonna see exactly what happens, but we're gonna get started right away, my friends. But as usual, if you enjoy my work, please like and subscribe and become a member here on YouTube or Patreon. You can hit the join button below this video and see all the different perks you can get at the different levels. You can get access to all our members only videos. There's a new one every week. There's probably hundreds of them by now. And we're having a members only video right after this called A Neurosurgeon Reveals or Confirms the Existence of the Soul. So that's going to be a good one. You can access to that. Access to our Discord server where we have live study groups and study sessions every Sunday. Anyway, check it out. It's the best way to support my channel and you get a lot of great stuff. And also remember that my book series is being released one at a time. The first and second books are out right now. So the link is in the description of the video to check that out. So you can check out Neogenesis, Dawn of the New Mind. This is the first book. And then the second book, Meta-Rationalism, The New Science of Mind, it is out as well. And the third book, Cosmogenesis, The Awakening Universe, is available for pre-order, comes out next week. But anyway, if you wonder which one to start with the first one, Neogenesis. Check it out. The links are in the description of this video. And as always, you can follow me on Spotify as well. Just look up Dawn of the New Earth on Spotify. And it's a great way to listen to the content, or it has video as well. Watch, Spotify can just be convenient sometimes. So it's pretty cool. Check it out. All right, my friends, we're going to dive right into this. This is the darkest chapter in the most disturbing creation story, The Paraphrase of Shem. And just to give you a little bit of a background on what's going here, you don't have to have seen the other videos. I have a playlist on this series. You don't have to have seen the other videos to know what's going on, but let me give you a little bit of background or else it's just going to be very, very strange. This essentially describes the war between darkness and light, which is essentially like the war between God and Satan. And we have various characters here. The light is really representing like the source of reality. Darkness is this satanic being. And then we have Derius, who is essentially the savior figure and messenger of the light, and so is essentially the Jesus figure, the Christ figure, and represents higher consciousness. And then in between all this, you have spirit, and spirit is sort of like the ego or ego consciousness that is called the little light. So it's like a spark of consciousness. It's not the true consciousness of the true light, the higher light, and hasn't reached higher consciousness represented by Derius, but it's sort of caught in between all this. So you have basically, according to this story, and you'll see why it gets weird, reality begins with what they call three roots: the darkness, the light, and the spirit. The darkness is a bit like all the evil forces, the darkness, the unconscious, Satan. The light is God or the higher self or the source of reality. And then spirit is like a spark of consciousness. And it's sort of trapped in this war where it's going to fall into darkness, but to try and regain its light. And Derius is sort of an emissary from the light to the spirit that acts as an intermediary, essentially a pathway to the higher self, to higher consciousness. But it gets very weird, where the material world starts to be born. And when I say born, it's described in a very literal way, with a womb and darkness ejaculating into it, and afterbirth. And if you want to hear all about that, you can in the video right previous to this one in the playlist called The Most Disturbing Creation Story Ever. But we're continuing here, where now Derius is going to get it on with nature. So the savior figure here, Jesus, is going to start to get a little freaky with nature. So let's just, like I said, it's going to get weird. We're going to just let's just start. Let's just start and go with it and see what unfolds from this interesting journey that we're about to partake in together, my friends. We're all in this together, whether you like it or not. Here we go. So, let's see. Let's begin here. Let me just bring up. Oh, so like I said, this is from the Gnostic book called The Paraphrase of Shem. A lot of people ask me, where can I read these books? Where can I read these books that were banned by the church? You can read them all for free on a website called gnosis.org. That's gnosis.org. It's a fantastic website. I highly recommend it. There's so much great information, and you can read all these books for free on there. So go check it out. It's great. So the very first heading here says, Derius dons a fiery garment and has sex with nature. And remember, Derius represents like higher consciousness and is the Christ figure. And let's start. So it says, then by the will of the majesty, and who's the majesty? The majesty is the light, the source. So by the will of the source, by the will of the essence of reality, this is Derius talking, or Jesus, however you want to interpret it. I took off my garment of light and I put on another garment of fire, which has no form, which is from the mind of the power, which was separated and which was prepared for me according to my will in the middle region. So, like I said, a lot of weird stuff. We're going to take this one bit at a time, and it gets weirder as we get further into it. Okay, so it doesn't start off. I mean, that's already sort of weird, but trust me, it gets weirder as we go on. So we have Derius, who we know is an emissary of the light, and we can think of as symbolic for higher consciousness. And he puts aside his pure spiritual form. And why? He's taking off his garment of light, and instead he's putting on a garment of fire. So this shift basically means he's getting ready to dive into the material world. He's leaving behind this higher divine state that he was in. So he's beginning his descent into matter. And so he takes off his garment of light and puts on another garment of fire. And what does this mean exactly? Well, this new form made of power, or made of fire, is like a powerful and dynamic force, kind of like he's gearing up with energy to take on the challenges that he's about to take on between the spiritual and material. Well, his fire is like, will and power and manifestation oftentimes. So he's taking off the light, the pureness, because he has to go down into the material world, which, remember, the Gnostics looked as dark and evil, because essentially we saw that darkness essentially had sex with nature, and so nature got twisted into this evil dark thing. And so now Derius, or Jesus, is going to go into nature and is preparing for this by removing his divine status. I mean, still divine, but you know what I mean. He's descending into the material world and getting ready for it with the power. So let's see. For the middle region, covered it with a dark power that I might come and put it on. I went down to chaos to save the whole light from it. For without the power of darkness, I could not oppose nature. So let's break this down, because this is already interesting. So we're talking about a middle region here, kind of an in-between place. And it's what essentially is saying here, because you notice that he says, without the power of darkness, right? So first he's going down to chaos to save the whole light from it. So that's essentially like, why is Derius going down into this dark underworld, which is the material world, to save the light that got trapped here? Because remember, the spirit, or the little light, essentially got trapped in nature. And so that's why Derius is doing this, going down to chaos to save the whole light. But it says, for without the power of darkness, I could not oppose nature. Now, this is a really kind of interesting way. It's sort of like, we could interpret this in different ways. Perhaps saying that, like, to confront and understand darkness, you need the power of darkness to oppose nature. Like, you can't do it from that pure state. You have to go down into the muddy, dirty world yourself. As we saw, he heads straight into chaos, which is disorder and confusion, and is going to rescue the divine light that's trapped in all that mess, which is, of course, the light is a symbol of the parts of consciousness that have been trapped in matter. And to deal with this world, which is the physical, corrupted side of existence, Derius has to use this power of darkness. So it's like sometimes to overcome what's negative, you have to engage with it. And this is kind of an interesting idea where, remember earlier we talked about how we can understand this as representative of the psyche as well. We can understand the light is higher as the higher self, and the spirit as the ego, and the darkness is the unconscious, and Derius is higher consciousness. And so we can kind of understand that in order to transcend darkness, we have to engage with darkness. And in terms of like Jungian psychology, this is where Jung says, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. And let me look up this other quote by Jung, because it's a great one. So Jung says, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. So understanding the darkness, engaging with the darkness is necessary for enlightenment. So let's see where we're at here. When I came into nature, she was not able to tolerate my power, but I rested myself upon her staring eye, which was a light from the spirit, for it had been prepared for me as a garment and rest by the spirit. Through me, he opened his eyes down to Hades. He granted nature his voice for a time. So it's going to get weird in a minute. I'm just laughing because I see what some of the next stuff is. But okay, so as of now, he says, when I came into nature, she was not able to tolerate my power. So when the Derius enters the material world, meaning nature, the physical, chaotic aspects of life, it's overwhelmed by the intensity of his spiritual power. So, because remember, Derius isn't just like the spirit. Derius is an emissary from the light. He's that Christ savior figure, but not a savior like savior for sin, but bringing knowledge. So he's a very powerful, he represents higher consciousness essentially. And so this is overwhelming. This power is like overwhelming for nature. Then Derius says, but I rested myself upon her eye, which was a light from the spirit. And so what's kind of happening here is that he's finding a spot to stabilize himself by focusing on a part of nature that perhaps contains some spiritual light. Because it's, nature became corrupted by darkness. And it's this dark, chaotic mode that can't handle the light of Derius. But it says that, but he rested himself upon her staring eye. So this could very possibly mean, because eye is related to sight and seeing. And especially if it's light, like seeing the light, it seems like this may be saying that, well, nature in general was having a hard time engaging with the power of Derius, but Derius found a spot to stabilize himself, the spot that's represented by the eye that could perhaps be that he could engage with. So, in other words, it might contain or have the capacity for understanding your spiritual light. This staring eye is kind of like a little beacon in the darkness of awareness or consciousness within the material world. And it says, for it had been prepared for me as a garment and rest by the spirit. Through me, he opened his eyes down to Hades. He granted nature his voice for a time. So, okay, we're talking about how the spiritual light within nature was meant to be a place where Derius could find rest, even in the middle of chaos. And here there are still pieces of the divine, right? This is where I rested myself upon her staring eye, which was the light from the spirit. And remember, So that's interesting as well. Remember the spirit, in the beginning, there's the light, the darkness, and the spirit. The spirit is the little light, the lesser light, which is like the light of ego consciousness, the light of consciousness. So essentially what Derius is doing is finding the light of consciousness, which makes total sense. If you are having this interaction here from higher consciousness to consciousness, and Derius, or from the higher self to consciousness, and Derius represents higher consciousness as that stepping stone or path to it. Derius is coming down and finding the little light in the darkness. And that's very, very, very apropos. It's very fitting to, because higher consciousness is going to engage with the light of consciousness. So he's finding that light in the dark essentially to engage with. And through me, he opened his eyes down to Hades. He granted nature his voice for a time. So through Derius, this divine force, it gives nature the ability to become aware of the underworld or Hades. And so for a little while nature gets a voice. And so nature is beginning to, or not even nature, I would say it's the spirit, which is associated with the eye, right? The eye of nature is the light from the spirit. So this eye of nature representing the light of the spirit, it's the part of nature that has the capacity to interact with the spirit and become aware. And through me, he opened his eyes down to Hades and granted nature his voice for a time. So again, this is a really cool way to understand this in like a Jungian way, where higher consciousness engages with consciousness, which allows it to look down into Hades or look down into the unconscious, giving it a voice for a time, meaning to bring it into consciousness. So pretty cool stuff. So by the way, if it's a little confusing, we kind of have two things going on at the same time here. We have a more like description of like the immaterial realm and the physical realm, between the realm of light and the realm of matter. But that's also reflected in our psyches, as above, so below, as within, so without. So we're looking at sort of dual processes here at the same time, the interaction of light and matter and the birth of the material world, as well as the structure of the psyche, the higher self, higher consciousness, the ego, and the unconscious. So I just want to make that clear. We're talking about sort of two parallel explanations or understandings at the same time. Okay. And my garment of fire, according to the will of the majesty, went down to what is strong, and to the unclean portion of nature that the power of darkness was covering. Okay, so remember, before, Derius was resting on the eye, which was a light in the corruption of nature. But now his garment of fire, or his power, his energy, is going down to what is strong. He's straying away from the safe light of but he's going into the chaotic element of it, down into the unclean portion of nature, the power of darkness was covering. So no longer where light was, but where darkness has totally taken over everything. So his fiery energy is going deeper into the most intense and impure parts covered by dark forces. And so he's engaging more deeply with the corrupted aspects of the material world. Or if we're thinking of it in terms of the mind, deeper down into the unconscious. So, and my garment rubbed nature in her covering. Her unclean femininity was strong. So when he says his garment rubbed nature, I think there's some stuff going on here, because later on there's more. There's actually a lot of rubbing that happens in this story, As I said, it gets a little weirder as we go forward. And so his garment rubs nature in her covering, and her unclean femininity was strong. So what is this talking about here? Because that sounds, doesn't sound good. What do you mean by unclean femininity? Well, basically what's happening here is that there's a interaction happening between the fiery form of Derdekius' power, and nature. And so when it says like the unclean femininity, it's not saying that like everything that is feminine is unclean. What's it saying here is that they usually associated nature with the feminine, so I have a couple opinions about this. I think it's interesting to associate femininity with the material world, because we see that a lot in paganism, like Mother Gaia, Mother Earth. We see that a lot. However, the only unfortunate part about that is that in terms of Gnosticism, they saw the material world as being evil. So it has a little bit more of a negative connotation. But the Gnostics were not anti-woman, as we see. There's so many powerful female archetypes in Gnosticism, like Sophia and Norea and Eve. It has a lot of female empowerment in it. But unfortunately, yeah, and that's one of the things I don't like about Gnosticism is the association with the material world as evil. I don't see the material world as being evil. I see the material world as just being an aspect of reality, which is ours to mold and form according to our will. But anyway, the Gnostics saw the material world as evil. And so when they're talking about the unclean femininity, they're not saying all femininity is unclean. They're saying that this aspect of the feminine was unclean because they're talking about what they view as nature being corrupted by darkness, a raw, chaotic, destructive forces of nature. And it says, and the wrathful womb came up and made my mind dry, resembling a fish that has a drop of fire and a power of fire. And when nature had cast off the mind, she was troubled and wept. When she was hurt and in her tears, she cast off the power of the spirit and remained as I am. I put on the light of the spirit and rested with my garment on account of the sight of the fish and the deeds of nature, and that the deeds of nature might be condemned, since she is blind. Manifold animals came out of her in accordance with the number of the fleeting winds. All of them came into being in Hades, searching for the light of the mind that took shape. They were not able to stand up against it, and I rejoiced over their ignorance. Okay, I could take 30 minutes to go through this line by line and figure out here what we're talking about this fish that represents the mind that's drying up and all that. But I want to continue because we have a lot more to go here, and I don't want to. When essentially we can understand it as meaning that what's going on here is there's an interaction between this light and nature. And because of this interaction of light and nature, there is a process occurring where that ultimately results in chaotic forces and animals coming into being, searching for the light, but unable to see it. So we don't really need to go into detail on all that. But let's continue, because now it says Derdekius fools nature, and creation begins. So let's talk a little bit about what's going on here. It says, they found me. So they, I'm assuming, means the animals, because a bunch of animals were birthed from this interaction and rubbing of Derdekius and nature. It says, they found me, the son of the majesty, in front of the womb that has many forms. I put on the beast and laid before her a great request that heaven and earth might come into being, so that the whole light might rise up. For in no other way could the power of the spirit be saved from bondage except that I appear to her in animal form. So there's a lot of weird stuff going in here. So we have Derius, where these other beings are coming up to him near the womb. And what does it mean by the womb? Well, this is obviously, well, maybe not obviously. Nature's womb symbolizes nature's creative potential. And so Derius is trying to get nature to create heaven and earth, because according to Derius, that is what is necessary for the light it needs to go through this process to be able to ultimately become released. And so Derius is at the womb because he wants to convince nature to create heaven and earth. I tell you, this is a weird creation story. I know, it's a very weird creation story. Trust me, it's going to get weirder. So he's at the womb. So these animals or beings come up to him, and he says he puts on the beast, and later requests that heaven and earth would come into being. So he disguises himself as an animal, and he's doing this in order to connect with the natural and instinctual world. And essentially he's asking nature to create heaven and earth. And according to him, the only way that he could do this is by pretending to be another one of the beasts. So he's fooling nature apparently into creating things from the womb, because ultimately Derius wants to release all the trapped spiritual light. And Derius thinks that this ultimately this is the way to do that. For in no other way could the power of the spirit be saved from the bondage except that I appear to her in animal form. Therefore she was gracious to me as if I was her son. So this is why Derius is pretending to be an animal, so that she will listen to him and engage with him. And he's essentially saying that the only way for the spiritual power trapped in the material world, the only way to free it is by interacting with nature in a form that she can relate to, or an animal form. And so obviously, according to the story, it's to trick nature. But what can we understand this symbolically to mean? Symbolically, this may mean having to embrace aspects of nature, embrace aspects of our natural elements. Now, I don't think the Gnostics would really interpret it this way. But again, if we're taking like a Jungian analysis to it, we don't want to deny our animalistic urges, but rather we want to integrate them. We want to acknowledge them, and we want to understand them. But I doubt that that's what the Gnostics would interpret that as, because like I said, the Gnostics saw that as being evil. But anyway, so nature was gracious and responds to his request, and nature is more cooperative when she sees this being as being a part of her rather than coming from somewhere else. And on account of my request, nature arose, since she possesses the power of the spirit and the darkness and the fire. All right, so nature possesses the power of the spirit and the darkness and the fire. So what does all this mean? We have nature, who has the power of the spirit, and the spirit is the little light of consciousness, the darkness, which we can understand as the unconscious, and the fire, which is symbolic for creation, manifestation, will. So it's really describing, in miniature, we are that in miniature, in that we have the natural physical part, our bodies, we have the spirit, which is our consciousness, and then we have the darkness, which is our unconscious. So we can see that as well. For she had taken off her forms. When she had cast it off, she blew upon the water. The heaven was created, and from the foam of heaven the earth came into being. And at my wish it brought forth all kinds of food in accordance with the number of the beasts. And it brought forth dew from the wind on account of you and those who will be conceived the second time upon the earth. For the earth possessed a power of chaotic fire. Therefore, it brought forth, every seed. By the way, I know this is a weird creation story, but can you imagine if this were in the Bible instead of in the story that we have in Genesis? This would be what Christianity would believe today. I mean, I guess what I'm saying is this seems like a weird story, and it is a weird story. But all the stories in the Bible are weird. This isn't in the Bible, but what I'm saying is, like, to us, it's like, well, this is weird. Whereas we're more familiar with the stories in the Bible that are just as weird. But can you imagine, like, if this did make it into the Bible, we'd have the whole religion would be based on, Derius having sex with nature and pretending to be an animal and wombs bursting forth and all this. So anyway, and when the heaven and the earth were created, my garment of fire arose in the midst of the cloud of nature and shone upon the whole world until nature became dry. The darkness that was the earth's garment was cast into the harmful waters. The middle region was cleansed from the darkness, but the womb grieved because of what had happened. She perceived in her parts water like a mirror. When she perceived it, she wondered how it had come into being. Therefore, she remained a widow. So do you see how this like reflective aspect, this aspect of perceiving oneself through all this interaction, because of this, through all that, remember, Derius wants to release the light from the material world, and from all this creation, she's beginning to, perceive herself in the water like a mirror, and she grieves because of it. And it continues by saying, it was also astonished that it was not in her, for still the forms possessed a power of fire and light. The power remained, that it might be in nature until all the powers are taken away from her. For just as the light of the Spirit has completed in 3 clouds, it is necessary also that the power that is in Hades be completed at the appointed time. For because of the grace of the majesty, I came forth to her from the water of the second time, for my face pleased her. Her face was also glad. Again, there's a lot. We could go line by line and interpret all this, but I don't really feel like that's necessary. It's just kind of still reiterating the same idea here. Ultimately, that this is a process of bringing darkness to light, where we have Hades that will be completed at a point in time. Nature's beginning to recognize herself in the water, and Derius came forth to her from the water, and her face and his face pleased her. And this is different before, when it seemed like, nature didn't really seem to get along that well with Derius. But now it seems as though that when Derius is coming forth from the water, which is the reflection of nature, you see how nature is seeing, getting a reflection of herself, and higher consciousness is coming from that reflection. And now, because it's that reflected understanding, nature is happy to see Derius, and that higher consciousness, instead of being something foreign or odd, is now more natural. I guess a way to understand this is kind of like people who haven't reached a higher consciousness. If they interact with someone with a higher consciousness, they're going to think that they're weird as fuck usually. Like, what are you talking about? What do you mean there's an immaterial world? What do you mean that we're eternal? What's wrong with you? You're weird. Like, what? That's so foreign and other and different and strange. What are you talking about? I just want to watch Netflix and get a hamburger. What do you mean we're eternal and the reality is frequencies and all that? But when one sees it for themselves, reflecting in the mirror, and higher consciousness approaches them from that reflected aspect, when they know themselves, well, then it's welcomed. So that's one way that we could understand this if we're taking a symbolic interpretation of these ideas. So, now we're gonna have more sex here. So Derius commands nature to give birth, and so Derius is speaking here, and Derius says, "And I said to her, may seed and power come forth from you upon the earth. And she obeyed the will of the Spirit, that she might be brought to naught. And when her forms returned, they rubbed their tongues with each other and copulated. They produced winds and demons, and the power that is from the fire and darkness and the spirit. So we're having some interesting occurrence here, where the forms of nature are manifesting, because Derius is essentially, what Derius is doing is commanding nature to release her creative potential. This is what it means by bringing forth life and energy or seed and power onto the earth. And this is essentially getting to the idea of like the world's fertility and creation starting to take shape. That's why we're getting this imagery of copulation, because we're getting into the idea of fertility and creation. So once nature's forms are restored, they begin rubbing their tongues and copulating. They're making out, they're screwing, and this is symbolic for the creative forces of nature. Nature beginning this process of creation, and it says it leads to the birth of winds and demons. Like winds, can we understand, movement, and demons, chaotic energy, and then we have other just everything becoming born from this copulation of nature with itself. So, but the form that remained alone cast the beast from herself. She did not have intercourse, but she was the one who rubbed herself alone. And she brought forth a wind that possessed a power from the fire and the darkness and the spirit. Okay, so this is an interesting idea here for a number of reasons. One particular form of nature is isolated and doesn't join in the collective creation. She rejects the beast, it says, possibly meaning she's rejecting the chaotic, untamed elements, the more instinctual elements. She's rejecting that aspect and acting more according to her own will and independently. And it says like she's rubs herself rather than having intercourse. So this is possibly reflecting a more independent, a more pure and self-contained aspect of nature, a higher aspect of nature. And because it continues, she brought forth a wind that possessed a power from the fire and the darkness of spirit. And this is essentially wind has to do with movement, and a power from the fire and the darkness and the spirit. We're having this multifaceted element here where fire is the capacity for creation. Darkness is more like the unconscious or nature, depending on which aspect you're taking, and spirit is the light of consciousness. So we have a lot of sex happening. One aspect of nature doesn't engage in the orgy, but instead has some alone time. And we continue here. And in order that the demons also might become devoid of the power that they possessed through the impure intercourse. So again, a lot of the Gnostics thought that sex was wrong. They thought that sex was evil. See, these are some of the main aspects that I don't agree with. I don't agree. There's a lot of great stuff about Gnosticism, and there's a lot of different interpretation of Gnosticism. So not all Gnostics were like, some Gnostics thought that you needed to engage with the material world, like the Cainites, not the Canaanites, but the Cainites. The Cainites were a sect of Gnostics, along with the Marcellians and who was the teacher of Marcellina? I'm drawing a blank on his name. I can't remember. But whoever the teacher of Marcellina was, the Marcellians and the Cainites essentially believed that it wasn't about rejecting the material world, but engaging with it to overcome it. And I much prefer that interpretation. I think that's a much healthier interpretation, kind of like you need to make the darkness conscious and integrate it rather than just ignoring it or condemning it. But anyway, they're talking about the impure intercourse here because, according to a lot of the Gnostics, sex was looked at as something negative because it was associated with the material world. It was associated with being tied to the material world, and was associated with bringing more souls into the material world. So a lot of Gnostics, like the Sethians and I believe the Valentinians, actually, I'm not 100% sure about the Valentinians. Sethians, yeah, they looked at sex as negative. I know the Valentinians were very into spiritual copulation because their Gospel of Philip is all about the ritual of the bridal chamber. So let's not throw the Valentinians in there. But the Cathars were against that as well. Whether we consider the Cathars Gnostics or not is up for debate. They had a lot of Gnostic beliefs. But anyway, so that's what essentially is getting at here. So in order that demons might become devoid of the power that they possessed through the impure intercourse, a womb was with the winds resembling water. So they want to get the demons to give up the power that they possess. And an unclean penis, gross, was with the demons in accordance with the example of the darkness, and in the way he rubbed with the womb from the beginning. And after the forms of nature had been together, they separated from each other. They cast off the power, being astonished about the deceit that had happened to them. They grieved with an eternal grief, and they covered themselves with their power. So the demons here have an unclean penis, which symbolizes this connection to the dark, impure nature. And it's really highlighting the corruption that they saw in nature, rooted in this like primordial darkness and chaos. And so they're representative of this force through impure, unclean intercourse that they viewed as dark and demonic and negative. Where did it go? Let me bring it back up on screen. Okay. So Derdekius says, and when I had put them to shame, ooh, what's going on there? See, like, hey, my penis is the better penis. Anyway, when Derdekius put them to shame, he says, I arose with my garment in the power, which is above the beast, which is a light, in order that I might make nature desolate. So here we're getting to Derdekius really talking about what he's attempting to do. So Derdekius is ascending with his power, which is essentially overcoming these base animalistic aspects of nature. And he wants to purify nature and free it from corruption. And it continues by saying, and this is actually quite interesting. Where am I at here? The mind that it had appeared in the nature of darkness, and that was the eye of darkness, as my wish reigned over the winds and the demons. And I gave him likeness of fire, light, and attentiveness, and a share of guileless reason. Therefore, he was given the greatness in order to be strong in his power, independent of the power, independent of the light of the spirit, and intercourse of darkness, in order at the end of time, when nature will be destroyed, he may find rest in the honored place, for he will be found faithful, since he had loathed the unchastity of nature with the darkness. So this is essentially talking about the power of the mind. The mind arises, and remember, Derdekius' whole point is to free the light from darkness, and so a mind appeared in the nature of darkness and was the eye of darkness, but Derdekius gives to this mind an eye, fire, light, attentiveness, and reason. So this is the development of like mental faculties, reason, self-reflection, what we think of as reasoning and logical analysis and understanding. And it says, therefore, he was given of the greatness in order to be strong in his power. And so at the end of the time, when nature will be destroyed, he may find rest in the honored place, for he will be found faithful, since he loathed the unchastity of nature with the darkness. So this mind arises, Derius, representing higher consciousness, gives the power of the mind of reason and understanding. And this mind will ultimately reach the true realm of divine light, because through its understanding and knowledge and reason, it will overcome nature and loathe the unchastity of nature with the darkness. So this strong mind is going to basically, through its reason and understanding, overcome nature and reach transcendence. Again, not a huge fan of always looking at nature as being super evil, but you can kind of get what they're saying, and it's still very interesting. So the strong power of the mind came into being from the mind and the unconceived spirit. But the winds, which are demons from water and fire and darkness and light, had intercourse unto perdition. They're just having lots of sex, all these demons. And through this intercourse, the winds received in their womb foam from the penis of the demons. Again, gross. They conceived a power in their womb from the breathing. The wombs of the winds girded each other until the times of the birth came. They went down to the water, and the power was delivered through the breathing that causes the births in the midst of the rubbing. And I just don't like that word. I don't like the rubbing. This is weird. And every form of the birth received shape in it. When the times of the birth were near, all the winds were gathered from the water that is near the earth. They gave birth to all kinds of unchastity. And the place where the wind alone went was permeated with unchastity. Remember, that's sex. They're having lots of sex all the time. Barren wives came from it, and sterile husbands, for just as they are born, so they bear. Barren wives coming from it, and sterile husbands, meaning essentially that those individuals that were obsessed with the material world, like fucking, were sterile, not meaning that they didn't literally give birth, but in a symbolic way, and they didn't produce any. They didn't produce anything productive. They didn't make any progress. Production, or like the fruit of one's labor, is often symbolic for like making progress and going forward. And it's basically saying all those that were obsessed with all this intercourse were not, they were sterile. They were barren. They didn't have anything noteworthy to produce. They were just bathed in darkness and nature and engaging with darkness and nature, and nothing from the light came from this. So essentially, this quite involved creation story here is essentially Derius, or Jesus, and darkness, or Satan, all having a big orgy down in nature, and influencing it in one way or the other. Darkness corrupting nature, Derius influencing nature to create in a way that will allow for the formation of the mind, which then higher consciousness, or Derius gives the power of reason to, which will, the mind with the power of reason will eventually be able to overcome the forces of darkness and the forces of nature and reach the realm of light. And this is just described with a lot of rubbing and a lot of demon penises and a lot of foam and wombs and whatnot. And so this is going to continue. Remember the story of the flood and the Tower of Babel and Sodom and Gomorrah. It's going to continue with all these stories that we're familiar with from the Bible, but I'm sure in a very unique and likely graphic way, but we shall see. So I hope you enjoyed that, my friends. If you want to know more about this, check out the whole playlist. Like I said, it's a very weird, very odd, very strange creation story, but it's interesting, and we can understand a lot from it by thinking about in terms of like higher consciousness and lower consciousness. The only thing, like I said, I'm not a huge fan of is looking at nature as being so evil, and looking at sexuality as being so evil. Not a huge fan of that, but we can still learn from it and understand it in terms of integration rather than destruction. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed that, my friends. It was an interesting read for sure. Like I said, you can read this for free on gnosis.org, gnosis.org, and become a member on YouTube. If you want to support my channel, hit the join button right below this video. We're having a members only video right after this called Neurosurgeon Confirms the Existence of the Soul. That's going to be good. And if you want to know more about my thoughts and ideas and philosophy, check out Neogenesis, Dawn of the New Mind, and my other books in the Neogenian series. The link is in the description of this video. And follow me on Spotify. I'm going to give a big shout out to everyone who supports. Thank you guys so much, especially Renaissance Fairy, Cassidy, Angela, DB, Nusalina, Christopher, Eon, Vanessa, and Dallas. Thank you very much.